They keep us in fear to manipulate us. They want us ignorant so we're easier to enslave. They make us murder one another so they don't have to do it themselves. Only you can break their mind control by healing the contradictions within your belief systems that allow you to accept their lies in the first place. The time has come for us to remember our divinity, who we really are, to return to what we are meant to be, a service to others, to return to nature, and to reclaim our birthright, that which is freedom. The truth will sound belligerent because it is in direct opposition to lies. So get angry, because anger is sacred. And together we can unite and rise. Rise from this darkness. Humanity, assemble.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Do you love topics about history, world events, popular conspiracies, and everything under the sun, while discussing their historical context? Then welcome your host, Trinity, where no topic is off the table, truth is spoken to power, and where your voice can be heard. Here is where you can communicate openly and learn from one another, while respecting our diverse society and figuring out the truth to where we're heading. Join Trinity in a 2-hour roller coaster ride of research, comedy, and interesting content, made with you in mind, people that matter the most. On Mondays at 12 a.m. Eastern and 11 p.m. Central, only on Revolution Radio Studio B. Be a part of a different way to hear radio.
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the 4 most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number 1 is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number 2 is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number 3, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number 4 is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hi, you're listening to the Maverick artist VictorHugo on the Modern Art Gonzo Journalism Show on Revolution Radio. My job is not to be politically correct. It is to witness, observe, analyze, and document the beautiful chaos that surrounds us all, so that future generations can understand how we got to this moment in time where I am broadcasting from the border with Russia, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan on behalf of the modern art music movement. And I'm blessed to be joined by my special guest, Leo Zagami, the author of a number of books, some of which are in a series called Confessions of an Illuminati, and also a Illuminati cookbook as well. Am I correct? You are a chef as well, right?
Well, my wife more than me nowadays. I kind of brought her to Italy, and in 10 years she learned all the tricks of Italian cuisine, and now she has become much better than I ever was. So I kind of started her, encouraged her, and now we have created the Zagami Family Cookbook, which is widely available on Amazon, and it's based on the typical recipes of Italian cooking, but it gives you a lot of hints on how to make fresh pasta, on how to make pizza, on how to really enjoy Italian cuisine, but real Italian cuisine. So my wife has Italo-American origins. She was brought up in Brooklyn, so she knew a little bit about Italo-American cuisine, but Italian cuisine is specific, and Italians are very particular about things. So this is the first time that really people can get a book like this and really accede to all the secrets and make them in real time in their own, in their own kitchen without having to go to complex courses or stuff like that. The important thing I always say and myself, I love cooking, is about the ingredients. So just like a book, is made of fine ingredients, fine sources that you can trust. And this is the same thing when it comes to a cookbook. It's all about the ingredients. And today, I must say, with RFK Jr. As a member of, hopefully, of Trump's future government here in the United States, we will try to make also America healthy again. Because when you go to a restaurant, you don't really know what you're eating and what kind of ingredients. And so if it's GMO, we have a lot of GMO here, as you know, in the United States. And GMO, it's really something that makes your stomach, it completely hijacks your body. And I was not really used to GMO, but when I moved here to the United States in 2019, as you know, I was forced to leave Europe. I was persecuted in my native country of Italy. And this pushed me to renounce to my Italian citizen this year, because I'm still persecuted by the Italian judiciary as we speak. But now I'm an American citizen. And so as an American citizen, I arrived here, and the first thing I did was go to Walmart, and buy a lot of stuff at Walmart. Well, I no longer go to Walmart. I think that there is too much crap, too much garbage in their food, and so I prefer much more going in search of healthier ingredients, because we are what we eat. I say that actually in volume 9 of my Confessions, which is a book in which I talk also about insect witchcraft, insects, all this fascination about having to eat insects, also lab-grown meat, which has been encouraged by the New World Order, by the United Nations. And so I want to address this issue as a serious issue. We are really what we eat, and it's not a joke. If you eat the wrong things, your health will be affected. And so we need to eat healthy, and we need to make America healthy again, as RFK Jr. has proposed.
Yeah, these are dark times, and it's no joke. But one of the things that I was pleasantly surprised, I saw your podcast, the Leo Zagami Show. Am I correct? Is Christine your wife? Is she the woman that you speak of?
She's been my wife for many years. We used to live in Italy. Like I said, she was with me in Italy for over 10 years. And then at the end, we were forced into leaving that country because on the contrary of America, the laws that are in place in Italy are still the fascist laws, but the magistrates are leftist. So they kind of like during the Second World War, the Italian Masons who went abroad decided to keep those fascist laws and use them against their enemies once they would go back into power. And I, of course, was a Freemason. I was active in Freemasonry also in Italy. And I tried to make a difference by establishing in Italy a Christian Masonic order, but this didn't really work out very well for me, as well as my political involvement as the president of Italians for Trump, founded in 2015 when Trump was still running for his primaries, a unique organization which was recognized also by Steve Bannon and many other political pundits as being unique, because when he did took his oath of office in 2017, we did a great event in front of the American Embassy in Rome, another event in front of the Parliament in a very illustrious and chic building, palace, where all the VIPs arrived, and it was a great event. But Italy has been particularly hijacked after the Second World War. You see, Italy is a country that, like Germany and Japan, lost, and all the countries that lost were punished severely, and they are to this day castrated of their identity. Japan, Germany, and Italy. Italy in 1946 was forced into deciding to leave the monarchy. Well, there was this poll took to decide between monarchy and republic. In the White House, there were the Democrats, of course, the Democrats, as I call them. And Democrats, they ran an illegal, basically Italians was a country known because most of the people didn't know how to read. They were this ignorant in Italy. So it was very easy for the OSS, and later became the CIA, just going around and saying, well, put an X here, you will vote for monarchy. And it was the republic. So Italy was tricked into becoming a republic. Of course, the Savoy family was a family that did their job in the worst way possible. However, a royal house can be changed for another. But you see, what I explain in my books, also in volume 9, at the end of volume 9 in particular, is that while America has been founded as a constitutional republic in a unique way to distance themselves from Europe, Europe at the same time, because of Illuminism, because of the Illuminati, started to hijack one monarchy after the other, mostly because they wanted to go also after the religions they represented, just like they did in Russia with the family, the imperial family. They wanted the imperial family out of the picture because of their connection with the Orthodox faith. The same thing with all the other monarchies in Europe. Either they became simply a facade for a constitutional republic, or the only real monarchy that stayed in place because they made a deal with the Illuminati, if we want to describe them with this term, was the British royal family, because they were always in charge of Freemasonry from the start. So they survived, and they survive to this day, but all the other monarchies were wiped off the face of the, and they were replaced by what? By republics that have constitutions that flow, and they are not really the American Constitution. So you have no real freedom of speech in Europe. And I am a witness to that. And people say, oh, but you went all the way to America. Europe is such a beautiful and free place. No, Europe is a technocracy with unelected people in charge in Brussels. And if you talk the truth, you will be persecuted. And I was arrested only for, or the police broke through my door, and my wife was interrogated only because of Facebook posts I was making. At one point, I had to stop making Facebook posts. In Italy, the last few months of my permanence there, of my staying there, I didn't post anymore in the Italian language, and I stopped posting about Italy because I was threatened. The police was coming at my door as soon as I make a Facebook post. So this is the situation, the real situation in Europe that people don't want to acknowledge. In NATO, you see, I describe this in my latest book, volume 11.
Can we see it again?
This one. It's basically a book. It's called The Past, Present, and Future of Mind Control. And of course, you have Sun Tzu represent the early birth of psychological operations. You have, of course, Lee Harvey Oswald. You have Thomas Crooks, who attempted to kill Donald J. Trump. You have the first civilian director of the CIA, who gave the birth to the mythological, I would say, MK Ultra, which lasted only until the early 1970s, what people are still talking about it. There is many other programs and projects that followed, which I also talk about in this book. So when I I was in Italy, I realized that the European people were subject to a different kind of mind control. Voice of America, once upon a time, was only addressed for people outside of the United States. And it's been always a massive psychological operation. Now we will have, fortunately, Kerry Lake, probably, hopefully, will do a better job with Trump. But in 1948, under Truman, to avoid Americans being brainwashed, they passed the Smith-Mundt Act. The Smith-Mundt Act was very important because all NATO countries could be brainwashed, left, right, and center, starting from Germany, of course, Italy, the countries that were in particular, like Italy, Germany, and Japan, which I said lost the war, they were particularly affected because they had to be reprogrammed and brainwashed aggressively. So all their traditions that tended to have anything that led to a real nationalistic identity like before will be sabotaged, and you will be thrown in jail, or you will be even killed if possible, because they, as you know, then they also put in place Operation Gladio, in particular in Italy, but in all over Europe, we have stayed behind operations for that. So as an Italian, I witnessed as an Italian, I'm actually also half British, so I'm half and half. I witnessed two wars from when I was very little. I witnessed the world of the imperial British rule from a very privileged point of view, because my grandfather was a cousin to the Queen Mother, so we are aristocrats. We are, even involved with the royal family, because my Lion family from Scotland got to marry basically with the Windsors and became part of this Hanoverian stronghold. But what happens is I notice how the Brits still rule, the Italians are still a colony to this day, and that the privileges that Anglo-Saxons people have, American and English people, when they went to Europe and in countries like Italy, well, they had a lot more privileges. I mean, the way they bowed down to my mother was almost like they were bowing down to the Queen. So I was kind of like a little bit fascinated by this reality when I was grown up. And then I saw the level of mind control and brainwashing. And like I said, the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948 that passed under Truman didn't permit the Americans to be subject to this kind of brainwashing. So until 2012, like I explained in volume 11, in 2012, under Obama, with the internet nowadays being almost without any frontiers, they decided to do a Reformation Act that will then permit certain parts of the American people, for example, the Arab population, with the excuse that the Arab population was subject to Al-Qaeda propaganda, which is ridiculous because Al-Qaeda was created by NATO and by the CIA. They said, oh, well, now we can implement psychological operations on the American people. This is a big loss for the American people. Of course, there was a case also moved by a couple of journalists from USA Today immediately after. We kind of put on hold the whole thing, but still, we are subject nowadays to cognitive warfare and psychological warfare in an unprecedented way within the United States because of Barack Hussein Obama. And unfortunately, nobody seems to acknowledge that fully. So in my book, I wanted to explain that was a turning point because Americans will never receive the same kind of brainwashing as the Europeans. From 2012, things started to change. And in fact, if it wasn't for Donald J. Trump, we would have become another brainwashed country like also Canada. Canada, in my book, Canada has a whole chapter because Canada has been the laboratory for mind control, both during the 20 years of MK Ultra, as well as in more recent times during the pandemic, and this has been admitted by the Canadian government, and there was an investigation also conducted by the Ottawa Citizen. They used basically the pandemic to implement their cognitive warfare, which is a new kind of mind control, which I present in my book. It's not any longer simply the psychological operation that consists in directing information on vast segments or small segments of the population. It's about targeting even individuals and then taking their data from the internet, social networks, and so on. And this, together with psychological operations, put together becomes cognitive warfare, which is the ultimate kind of mind control for the conquering of the brain, which has, like I explain in my latest book, now created also a command center, which is in Norfolk, Virginia. But the tradition goes back to Paris, because it was the French who created in 2002 at the École Économique the basis for this cognitive warfare that then developed until a French officer called François de Courcelles became in charge of the command center in Norfolk, Virginia. So, and then they experimented, of course, on Canada, because Canada is a country that doesn't have any rights. Poor Canadians, I feel sorry for them, but they are the most brainwashed country on the planet. And Trump has been trolling them rightly in the last few weeks, because I think they will be much better off if they became the 51st state of America. Unfortunately, they will not become the 51st state of America because they are brainwashed. But brainwashed means brainwashed. I mean, when they tried to rebel with their truck drive, they were very sweet. But the reaction from the government was draconian, was just like, we close down your bank accounts, we punish you, silence, you are Canadian, you have to obey, oh Canada, and that's it. Canada is a beautiful nation. You just have to go with that narrative. No, Canada is a laboratory for mind control. And Dr. Cameron, back in the days, who was a friend of, basically he was the guy in charge of sub-project 100, one of the sub-projects of, I think it was sub-project 68, I don't remember now the exact name, in Canada, of MK Ultra. He started to experiment in Montreal, this thing called psychic diving. And it was, of course, it damaged a lot of people that then later on, decades later, tried to see if they could eventually get maybe some money or some psychological assistance from the state. And they wanted to, of course, they wanted to sue the American government. But the Canadians initially seemed to say, oh, poor victims, but then in the end, the government took out a clause that made it impossible for them to attack in any way the American government, because there was a clause about foreign governments and interfering, whatever. So in the end, the Canadians have not been able to really get any compensation for the way they have been used as guinea pigs, always. And the last experiments that was conducted, I mean, by NATO during the pandemic. So we're not talking about the 1960s. We're not talking about the 1950s. We're talking about now. The Canadians don't seem to be able to do anything about it.
Let me ask you something. I want to go back to your show, the Leo Zagami show. Yes. There's an interesting chemistry between you and Christine. The things that you say right now could put people into a panic. And what's interesting is you're at the forefront, and like the saying goes, behind every strong man is a strong woman. And you have Christine to I guess this would be your right, and she's just behind you, and her expressions say everything. She doesn't say much. She's a woman of few words, but her face says everything. The last episode, you were talking about the UFOs and the drones and the Russians and the Chinese with the drone, and then you were talking about you put the poor girl in a panic. So what I'm trying to say is, what is it like? I'd like to have her on the show next time, because like
she doesn't
to
really,
the Illuminati.
She doesn't
to
really,
the Illuminati. Imagine when you introduced yourself to her, did you say, "Hi, I'm Leo Zagami. I'm Mr. Illuminati here," and all this stuff? I mean, what was that like? What was your courting like with her? How do you woo a woman like that?
Well, through a common friend on the internet. But what happened was that initially, of course, she didn't really know much about this world, though she comes from a family with a strong military background, so also a conservative and a Republican. But of course, I was fairly critical back then about George W. Bush, and that was didn't really work out very well. I had to explain a lot of things about that. But when she came to Italy the first time, she actually was introduced to people like Pier Giorgio Bassi, the vice president of the Academy of the Illuminati, immediately, because it happened that I had to give an interview and I was going to their office, which is close to the Vatican. So she started to meet these people in person. And that really shocked her because, I mean, one thing is to talk about it. The other thing is to live it. And then to see the persecution that followed after I published my books in Italy, which was a serious persecution. I mean, Christy was interrogated with the lights pointed at her face. She suffered some very traumatic and psychological stress because of what happened in Italy. So it's all. Of course, today we conduct a show on the internet, and of course, sometimes she might react in some way towards a certain news or another. But when you're talking about what we lived in Italy, we are talking about police breaking through your door with machine guns and putting her in front of a light like the Stasi used to do in Eastern Germany. I mean, back then, when this happened in particular, the persecution started to happen when I was involved in the Pitchfork insurrection between 2013 and the beginning of 2014. And I was eventually locked up by representatives of the Tavistock Institute, like I describe in this book. I mean, it was pretty stressful. And I'm I have very much admiration for the way she resisted, because they were saying to her openly, the police, why don't you go back to America? Why don't you leave him? Why don't you? So this is something that maybe people need to understand. We have lived these things, and then Christy at one point asked me, why can't you initiate me in Freemasonry? I said, okay, if you want to have this experience, in regular lodges, I can't initiate you because there is only men, but there is certain lodges which are, let's say, irregular, between brackets. And I brought her to London and she got this experience and she was raised Master Mason, but she was not satisfied in the end with the whole experience, but she wanted to have this experience. And she eventually relayed all these things in 2 books that she wrote, Volume 1 of Illuminati Princess Confession, Volume 1 and 2, Confessions of Illuminati Princess, explaining also what happened to us right at the end when we were really persecuted and we were forced to leave Italy without really knowing what our future would be. Because you see, in Europe, I had a network that I had established through decades, living in London, living in Oslo, living in Rome, working in Russia. I worked for the Russian Ministry of Culture. I was in Russia maybe more than 20 times. I was the first DJ to DJ at the Bolshoi. I met Vladimir Putin 2 times. I was guested in the Dutch outside of Moscow where Putin resides. I lived things that normal people don't live. I mean, I don't think everybody has this kind of experiences. So today, as an American citizen, I really like the fact that I'm free to write what I want. I don't have the paranoia of the police coming at my door. But the first 2 years we were living here, we arrived here in May 2019 in Palm Springs, where I still reside in California. For 2 years, every time even, I don't know, a UPS courier knocked at the door, I was like, during a show maybe or something, I was terrorized. And the same thing for my wife. So it's been not such a, of course, we tend to minimize it, smile, and get along also with our show, the Leo Zagami Show, in a way that makes people understand that even if the subjects are at times very, how you say, nefarious, if you want to use a term, we try to take them with a sense of humor, because we still understand that we are lucky and privileged enough to be in the United States, where we have the First Amendment. And the First Amendment, it's a great opportunity. as well as the Second Amendment. I believe that every country that has been taken weapons from, countries like Germany, Italy, Japan, where the weapons were systematically taken away from the population after the Second World War, as slaves, just like the Chinese communists and Mao Zedong in 1949 went after the weapons of all the Chinese that had to give them up after the Communist Party took. So having weapons, being able to say what you want, well, this is freedom. I enjoy it very much. Maybe people today still say America is not a perfect country. And America is not a perfect country, but the fact that we were able to participate with the Leo Zagami show actively in the election of Donald J. Trump. We were actually invited in Coachella with another 100,000 people, but we were in the backstage with the press. Trump treated us like VIPs. We were very happy. Me and my wife, we were astonished that they invited us and that they treated us like this, because we are a small reality. But at the same time, we were very thankful for what God has given us and the fact that I can still continue with my work. You see, in Italy, the judiciary was going after my books. They actually brought me in front of a court for what I wrote in my books. They said, you can't discuss this connection between the Vatican, Freemasonry, and the 'Ndrangheta mafia. I say, why? Oh, well, you can't. Well, but I have the evidence. Well, you can have the evidence, but as a journalist in Italy, you still have certain restrictions. I said, what kind of restrictions? I mean, I want to do my job. And so being able to do my job and being free to do my job is great. Of course, it's sad that I can't go back to Italy yet. I thought that now I give up my Italian citizenship, I will be able to go back. But unfortunately, the police has interrogated my mother last week, and I called back, and they want me to show up with a lawyer if I ever show up in Italy. There is pending cases against me, apparently, for defamation, which is a criminal law in Italy. You can be arrested. That's one of the fascist laws. You can't talk bad, for example, of the president of Italy. You get 7 years of jail if you talk bad about the president or the Pope. I talk about the president and Pope bad about them all the time, so I will be jailed for life. Then you can't write things because with the lawsuit of defamation, they silence journalists. That's why Italy is number 47 in the freedom of press chart. They are very low, lower than a lot of countries in Africa. So that's why people have this picturesque image of Italy, bel paese, pasta, mandolino. But this is a country ruled by mafiosi. The mafia is nowadays, of course, in charge of the country, like they always been, because Freemasonry is connected to the mafia in Italy. And like, for example, Russia, the Grand Lodge of Russia has created in 2015 the Grand Lodge of Georgia. It's a dependance of the Grand Lodge of Russia, the Grand Lodge of Georgia. They have.
Are you talking about the Republic of Georgia?
Yes.
The Orthodox Christian country? Oh,
yes.
That's where I'm at right now. I'm residing in the Republic of Georgia.
That's why I was telling you. In 2015, the Russian Freemasons, which I know very well because you can find on the internet even an interview with the deputy Grandmaster Smirnov back many years ago. And then I know I know a few of the people who are in charge of disobedience. But they are very close to the Russian government. That's why Freemasonry in Russia after 1995, when it was reformed, because during the Soviet Union, they were abolished. You see, what happened was that in 1905, the Tsar, under pressure, permitted the reawakening of Freemasonry and many other secret societies. At that point, the Grand Lodge, the Grand Orient of the Russian people was created. I explain this also in my books. And Vladimir Lenin took advantage of this form of Freemasonry, which was not regular Freemasonry. It was connected with the French Freemasonry. French Freemasonry, for those who don't know, entered the irregularity in the 1870s when they abandoned the belief of God and they started to get atheists in their lodges. And then you had, of course, the experiment of the Paris Commune, that experiment of leftist ideology that lasted not so long, but it was also encouraged by the Grand Lodge de France, one of the two main obediences in France at the time. Nowadays, you have also the Grand Lodge National de France, which is like a dependence of regularity from the United Grand Lodge of England. But the Grand Orient of France is the main obedience to this day in France. And they violate traditional Freemasonry values because they discuss politics, something that doesn't happen in regular Freemasonry, and religion. And of course, today we see what happens in France. I mean, that country is a country which has a lot of problems, unfortunately. But going back to Russia, Russia, all these Russian immigrants, like Lenin and many others, who then became the creator of the Bolshevik Revolution, they were formed and shaped by the French progressive lodges that had abandoned their belief in God. So that's what happened. And then, of course, like I explained in volume 11 of my Confessions, in October 1919, Vladimir Lenin met with Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov, who was the guy who was experiment mind control on the dogs with his experiments, famous experiment on the Pavlovian, no? And he started to talk with Ivan Pavlov on how to adapting mind control to the whole of the Soviet population, of the Russian population. And that was the beginning of mind control, formalized, institutionalized. And Pavlov, of course, from that moment onwards, was given access to all the mental asylums, all the hospitals in Russia, in the Soviet Union, to experiment further his experiments in mind control. For those who don't know, the Pavlovian experiments were based on dogs initially, with bells, salivation, and the way they will react to certain things. So this is the very early stages of mind control, and psychological operations is a different thing from, let's say, this kind of mind control, which is much more coercive. Psychological operations, like I described in volume 11, go back in military settings, have always been used. And that's why we have the Art of War of Sun Tzu, which is, as you know, the most ancient and important military treaty, that talks very, very specifically about the use of mind control with spies, with convincing the enemy about certain things, and eluding the enemy, and convincing the enemy is even at times more important than the warfare itself. It's a psychological warfare. That's why the use of the first psychological warriors, the Psi warriors, was encouraged by Sun Tzu and is described in The Art of War. Later on, we had the people in history that were more clever than others in using psychological operations. Like, for example, Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan comes from the middle of nowhere in the Gobi Desert, in the Mongolian, and he conquers half of the world. How does he do it? He do it because he was very clever. He will send his spies in the countries, in the towns he was about to conquer, to terrorize people, say, Genghis is arriving with 1 million strong. He will rape your daughters. He will tear your guts. He will eat your ears. He will, and they were like, and then at that point, when Genghis Khan shows up, he might have 10,000 soldiers, but for them it was 1 million. It is also about the art of illusion. It's a little bit like when you have an illusionist or a mentalist today, they call them, and they are with the cards and show, and they take out the rabbit out of the sea. Okay, all that. But in the war setting, you will, Genghis Khan will, for example, make the soldiers go from one mountain to the other, so that it gives the illusion that he had many more soldiers. And that is very clever, and that led to his success. Same thing for Napoleon. Napoleon was another great psychological operation expert. In fact, he said he did more damage with the sound of the marching than with the war itself, because he would terrorize the enemy with the marching sound. Tone, 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 So psychological operations have always been used in military contests. Nowadays, psychological warriors, psychological battalions are the first ones to be sent in countries where they're about to come out with a war. In Ukraine, it happened before, of course, 2014, and then later on it intensified, and then, of course, Ukraine is number one in the cognitive warfare that the West does to convince us that Volodymyr Zelensky is a good guy and that we all should bow down to his great. The guy's a crook, a comedian, an actor, a failed actor, probably. Not really a failed. He was quite successful in his, but it gives you an idea of how they produce something. And the Russians, of course, they have their own psychological operations in place. It's not that they don't. In fact, one thing that pushed the creation of MK Ultra, which is a more coercive and direct mind control experimentation, which at that point becomes brainwashing, which is different from psychological, brainwashing on the person, more coercive way. It was because at the beginning of the 50s, we had, of course, the war in Korea. We had the Soviets that had been expanding their mind control projects. The Nazis had, of course, been protagonists of a massive psychological warfare that brainwashed millions of people that were there. Heil Hitler, and this is what happened. So at that point, the Americans said, we need to do something about this. And that's where we also see, at the end of the 50s, the novel The Manchurian Candidate, which then became a movie in 1962, which, as you know, is very clear about how you brainwash somebody using hypnosis, drugs. Then you have the modern Manchurian Candidate version with Denzel Washington, where you have also the brain-computer interface, almost the implant in the brain. Now, the implants, though, in the brain, and I explained this in volume 11, go back to a long time before, because electrodes were already placed by the Russians in the Soviet Union for experimentation almost 100 years ago. In the 1930s, they started to do these kind of things in Russia. And so we think that Lee Harvey Oswald, who was recruited, and that is why they don't want to still reveal the whole truth about JFK. In Japan, in the Marine base where Lee Harvey Oswald was recruited for MK Ultra, there was one of the two bases in the Far East that experimented LSD. LSD was considered the miracle drug that they could use to brainwash left, right, and center, or to convince, or to even exceed other state of awareness. So there were various kind of things you could do with this drug. Lee Harvey Oswald volunteered to become part of it, and then he was sent to the Soviet Union because of this. And in the Soviet Union, of course, at this point, then he comes back. Let's not forget that they give him something like, I don't know, $4,000 to come back and replace himself in the United States. Like almost the America didn't care that he had betrayed them. Of course, he was working for them all along. But the narrative that the CIA has given since then, in that Lee Harvey Oswald was probably brainwashed by the Soviets, and then he came back, and then he killed JFK. That is the official narrative. In reality, Lee Harvey Oswald was programmed, sent to the Soviet Union, where he did certain things. He was brought up back here, where he could still connect with the Russians if he wanted. So to cover up this whole thing, I mean, they were killing the president of the United States, the deep state, and there was involved the CIA, the mafia, and the whole show there. So they had to build up a character that was convincing enough. And then the rest is history, of course. Nowadays, though, like I explained in volume 11, the interesting thing would be that with the Trump presidency, these secrets will be unveiled. However, in my book, I explain one interesting thing about this. You see, this guy here, I don't know if you ever see, you know this guy?
No, but he looks pretty nefarious.
Well, yeah, he was involved in the JFK plot. Howard Hunt was also known with another name. He came out with the book as Lincoln Lawrence. This book here.
Okay.
This book came out in 1967. And it's the first book, and probably the only book until 1974-75, when the whole MK Ultra thing was presented to the world, that discussed in detail mind control. And also, but because, of course, Howard Hunt was convicted also within, he was involved in the Watergate scandal. And the Watergate scandal had everything to do with MK Ultra because it had a lot of people involved that were involved with MK Ultra. So what happened was that they used all that chaos generated by the Watergate scandal to then, the head of the CIA, destroy all the evidence about MK Ultra, very conveniently, in 1973. Once
Leo, you have a pretty extensive grasp of history. I've noticed you haven't once mentioned the Jews. What do the Jews have to do
very profusely with the Jews? And
what do the Jews have to do?
No. In volume 10, this is a book called Islamic Freemasonry and the Eternal Conflict in the Middle East. I mean, and the secret societies behind the Eternal Conflict in the Middle East. There is a last chapter which is fundamental for the understanding of where we are now with what is happening in the Middle East and in Israel. You see, I am myself a minimum part Ashkenazi Jew, and I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I was able, thank God, to study amongst them, to learn about the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, to learn all the lies about the so-called Khazarian Jews, which is a completely BS because there's no DNA of Khazarian Jews. The Khazarians converted to Judaism, but they were not Jewish. So there is no DNA, there's no Khazarian mafia. There is, though, the Sabbatean Frankists. The Sabbatean Frankists are, for those who don't know, and I will give a brief explanation so your audience can understand. In the 17th century, a guy by the name of Shabbatai Zevi, who came from Izmir in Turkey, proclaimed himself to be the Messiah. He was the guy, his father was working for the British Empire, just so you start to understand the figure and the interest he had. He invited all the tribes to go back to Israel. He had this guy in Gaza called Nathan of Gaza, who became his... When you
say Israel, Israel wasn't around then, though.
No. But Israel, in fact, if you let me talk, I will explain. He was the first one to want people from all over the world to go back to what used to be in the idea. But because Jewish people didn't want to necessarily go to Israel, he was trying to convince them that will gather all the tribes back together. And by doing that, and by what happened later, because you see, he will eventually be, let's say, between brackets, excommunicated, even if it's not the proper term, with Judaism, from the Jewish counts, from the Jewish rabbis in Jerusalem, once they understood the danger of his cult. His messianic cult was everything but traditional Judaism. He got this wife from Livorno in Italy, who used to be a prostitute, to become his wife. He was doing sexual magic, black magic. His idea was, the more we do black magic, the more pig we eat when we are not supposed to and all that, the more we get closer to the Messianic era. It's really a sick principle that
it's redemption through sin.
Yes.
Yeah. So and they want to bring back the Satan. They're trying to bring back
absolutely. So what happened was that then 100 years later, a guy called Jacob Frank, born in Ukraine and close to Poland, he proclaimed to be his reincarnation. You see, certain branches of Judaism believe in reincarnation. So he went on. He was involved with the Jesuits and with the Catholic Church. So he brought 20,000 converts to the Catholic Church that then at that point felt obliged to protect him, though initially he was also, once the Jesuits started to be persecuted, he also got on their shit list, because there was a moment in history in which the Vatican persecuted the Jesuits, even if now they have a Jesuit Pope.
And the Pope is a Jew, because the Jesuits are Jews, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, we don't have to confound the Jewish thing element, because the Jewish, to condemn a whole race is anti-Semitic, and it's not my style. And I'm
but I just want to get, what is your definition of Semitic?
Yes, but like my good friend Roseanne Barr has taught me, back in the days when Moses was coming out of Egypt, he didn't bring only Jewish people with him. He brought what are known as the Erev Rav. And you can go and study this. He called Erev Rav. The Erev Rav were all the magicians in Egypt and stuff that saw the power of Moses and so, wow, we need to follow him. So when he went up the hill and he came back and he found the golden calf, it was the Erev Rav that had fomented and created that schismatic. So that was the initial, the beginning of the problems within Judaism. There will be at any given time, and this is a Jewish take on things, 72 Erev Rav heretics within Judaism that will ruin Judaism, that will push Judaism in the wrong direction. Now,
but like Roseanne Barr says, that the problem with the Jews now is that they're a tribe and they protect even those 72 heretics who destroy the inside. Because it's like the Democratic Party in the United States. They have a pedophile president, but they'll hide that. They'll say, okay, that's no problem. Now, one of the things I want to make sure that we communicate.
For those who don't know, I used to do, during the early stages of the pandemic and before, we used to have a show, me and Roseanne Barr, called The Pew. On the internet, you can still find some episodes around it. I invite you to follow it, because it was me, a rabbi from Tel Aviv, Roseanne, an Anglican gay priest, and another. We made a mix of different people from different setups. I will conduce the show with Roseanne. I will be the one who directing the whole show. And it was very good, because we could take different aspects from different and see how, what brings us together, what more than what brings us apart.
Leo, I would like, if you could, put Roseanne Barr and me together, and perhaps you could be the intermediary for that, because what's happening is in the United States.
I mean, at the moment, I no longer work with Roseanne because she seems to be very, very busy. We were supposed to do a show ourselves, but I don't have actually. I can, of course, I can try. I can ask her, because we
the reason I'm saying.
Now and then. But I doubt that she seems to be now back with a more managerial stuff than she was prior to the pandemic. Unfortunately, then she felt sick with the COVID. She got very sick because some journalists went to interview her in Hawaii, and they had this COVID, and so she got sick. And from that moment onwards, I think she gave back her organizational structure behind her to a more organized managerial, which I don't really work with. So I can attempt, I can tell her, but I don't guarantee you that she will accept.
That's okay. The reason why I think that would be good is because I actually am being portrayed by some as being anti-Semitic, because I dare to do what you were doing in Italy by actually just going down that rabbit hole and finding out through history and through things that are not really taught, specifically in the United States. Like I said, I understand what you said about Moses and these 72 heretics, just like Roseanne Barr says, but she even admitted that the problem is that the Jews protect these people that are on the inside, the Sabbatean Frankists, the cult that's within.
For example, wrote a volume 8 of my Confessions, which is based all on Hollywood and the Sabbatean Frankists in Hollywood, but also the occult side of Hollywood, which starts at the very beginning. People don't know. I mean, it starts from the moment in 1909 in the first dirt road in Oak, California, in which the first film director did his first movie. It started from that moment onwards because it was visited by Aleister Crowley, Hollywood, right at the start. And Crowley said, these people are degenerates. I mean, Crowley saying that these people are degenerates, it's pretty far out.
Yeah. So hold on. The thing about the anti-Semitism, though, is it's inversion, it's wordplay. The true Semites.
Here, listen, Victor, I think the problem is that people don't really understand that, for example, when you talk about the Catholic Church, you can't condemn the whole Catholic Church. You have to condemn the Catholic Church after the Second Vatican Council that was infiltrated by the Sabbatean Frankists and Freemasonry within the Second Vatican Council, the Jesuits, of course, which are the progressive forces. You talked about the Jesuits being Jews. Well, the Jesuits initially didn't have a prohibition, but later on implemented a prohibition for the Jews to enter their fold. But initially, as we know, Ignazio Loyola was connected also to a Gnostic group called the Alumbrados. Now, that brings us back to those heretical Jews. You see, Gnosticism is the original Illuminati that tried to kind of connect to Christianity and use the Christian imagery. But also within Judaism, you have Gnostics. You have people, Gnostics, that even before Christ came along, there was forms of Gnosticism within Judaism. And those forms of Gnosticism within Judaism, which were, of course, legacy of the Erev Rav, evocations of angel stuff and all that, led eventually to what I said, the heresy of the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. The problem is, like I explained in the last chapter of this book, what happens when the Sabbatean Frankists, who then actively start working within Freemasonry. The cousin of Jacob Frank started a specific order. Then later on, the Memphis and Mizraim rites of Freemasonry, the so-called Egyptian rites, were established by the Sabbateans. And that led eventually to the Protocols of the Sages of Zion, a book that was generated and created within a lodge. In fact, Maurice Joly, the guy who inspired the protocols that then were published with the support of the family of the Tsar, because they were duped into this supporting the protocols. And that the protocols, once it started, it became the big problem here, because the protocols of the Sages of Zion are the ones that led to the Holocaust, are the ones that have led to all this anti-Semitic behavior in the Middle East. They were initially...
When you say anti-Semitic, you do realize that the Lebanese, that the Syrians, that the Palestinians are actually Semitic, and the Ashkenazi Jews
when I'm talking about
Semitic.
Yes,
it's a language.
Yes,
that's a language.
When I say anti-Semitic, I say anti-Jewish. And I don't care if it's Ashkenazi or Sephardic. Jews are Jews, and it's a DNA proven.
Why does someone of your level of intelligence use a word that doesn't fit the description? Because you should be saying anti-Jewish.
I'm using
because
it
by saying anti-Semitism, you're feeding into the misinformation. Because anti-Semitic is something that's dangerous. Right now, they're trying to make it illegal in the United States to even be having this conversation that we're having now. I think we're coming up on a break soon. So we'll touch that on the next side, because I don't want people to be afraid or misunderstand the definition of anti-Semitic. We'll be right back. Sure. Listening to the Maverick Artist Hugo with my guest, Leo Zagami.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically autonomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday, 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's reality extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
Mountain High Time, 2 hours of an organization to the madness, discussing the ever-changing dynamics of being both physically and mentally prepared for a plethora of possible outcomes to our future and present. A look into the latest technologies, new scientific discoveries, and how they might be used in connection to the human domain and controlling it, ancient cultures and places. Be warned. This is an opinionated look through headlines, guests that are not afraid to question the narrative, a little bit of crazy ramblings of a stoner conspiracy factist that pushes constitutional concepts. The place and the time are the same, another dimension we call Mountain High Time. Saturdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Mountain High Time, right here on Revolution.radio, where information never sleeps and truth breaks the spell.
Do you love topics about history, world events, popular conspiracies, and everything under the sun, while discussing their historical context? Then welcome your host, Trinity, where no topic is off the table, truth is spoken to power, and where your voice can be heard. Here is where you can communicate openly and learn from one another, while respecting our diverse society and figuring out the truth to where we're heading. Join Trinity in a 2-hour roller coaster ride of research, comedy, and interesting content, made with you in mind, people that matter the most. On Mondays at 12 a.m. Eastern and 11 p.m. Central, only on Revolution Radio Studio B. Be a part of a different way to hear radio.
Are you a fan of rock and roll? Does it get your feet tapping and your hands clapping? Then be sure to check out Crip Rick's Rock and Roll Hour every Friday night, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern and Standard Time on Studio B, right here at RevolutionRadio.com, where we get down and talk all things rock.
If you're sick of the lies and ready to know thyself, to love thyself, well then tune in to the Loveolution with your hosts, Amy and John Paul, where we speak all about truth, love, and freedom every Tuesday night, 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Studio A, right here on the Revolution Radio. And remember, only you can free your mind control. Be a Loveolutionary.
The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite, surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing, in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fan. The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes, so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of the normal lotus-o-deltoid type, placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator, every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible tremie pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the gram meters.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, taking the confusion out of transmutated lunar girdle springs for 4 years and running. Revolution Radio, the #1 listener-supported alternative media radio on the planet. I want to thank everybody for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the one place where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
All right, let's show them what we got here.
All right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Hi, you're listening to the Modern Art Gonzo Journalism Show with your host, the Maverick artist Victor Hugo, and my special guest, Leo Zagami. And we are in the middle of a spirited discussion, and we're trying to get to the bottom of the, I call it spellcasting words. And Leo was talking about these projects where they mess with your brain and they have you believe things, and the propaganda and the Smith-Mundt Act. And we're living through a psyop right now. And one of the things that is happening in particularly my homeland of what I call the United States of Israel is that they are planning on passing laws that are anti-Semitism laws, from Governor Kristi Noem to in Texas with Ted Cruz, and even the, I want to say selected Donald Trump, the incoming president of the United States, who says that people who say things like what I'm saying.
The problem is that the left is blatantly anti-Semitic, and it's and I know that your term anti-Semitic. Now, Semitic is a term that was first used by the Illuminati of the Göttingen School of History in Germany. Is a term that today is largely unused outside of the fact that you define Semitic, the Jews. So that's why I say anti-Semitic. We can say anti-Jew if you want. It's not a problem. But the problem is what the left is doing here in the United States. You have been not in the United States. You haven't been in the United States for a long time. And let me tell you, I was shocked about the level of anti-Semitism that I saw and witnessed with these people in the White House in power. So I am a staunch supporter of Israel for the simple reason. You see, I have studied in detail books like this. I don't know if you know. This is the Encyclopedia of Zionism, and the main character which is introduced at the beginning when you open is, of course, Theodor Herzl, who founded the Zionism as we know it. But Zionism was quickly hijacked from being a nationalistic kind of organization into a Sabbatean Frankist labor Zionism. They created that negative labor Zionism, and then with their actions that led to the Balfour Declaration, what happened earlier with the Sykes-Picot Agreement between French and England. I know perfectly well that during the Ottoman Empire, everybody lived in peace, and there wasn't Israel as a state. But the problem is, if you do pogroms in Russia, if you do pogroms all over Europe, if you do the Holocaust, if in the 1930s the Sabbatean Frankists push basically their fellow Jews to go to Israel, well, that is basically like there is no other place left. So in the end, they were forced into going into this country where they actually live today and they try to prosper. But let's not forget the great responsibility of Great Britain, the great responsibility that France had in bringing down the Ottoman Empire. Because with their Masonic lodges all over the Ottoman Empire, they gradually sabotaged. And in fact, the Young Turks came out of Salonikos' main lodge, which was from the Dome. The Dome, as you know, the Sabbateans, Ataturk was a Dome. Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey. Modern Turkey today wants to go back to their role, hegemonic role in the Middle East, but they have, first of all, embraced everything Sabbatean Frankist. In fact, this is a country that today is ruled by two Masonic factions, which are embedded with the Sabbatean Frankist. And so I just want to clear this because, unfortunately, the fact that today we have all those problems, like Gaza, people say, oh, Gaza, the persecution. Well, guys, let's see what happened at the time of Saladin, because let's go back to Saladin here. Okay, the Templars arrive with the other Crusaders in the Middle East. And I explain this very well in volume 10 of my Confessions, which is a book I highly recommend you, because this is a book that comes from my personal experience also within Islamic secret societies, and is a book that brings also my personal experiences in the Middle East, aside from the history part. And the history part is very clear. The Shia, for example, part of Islam, was born out of a guy, Saba, who was a Jew, Erev Rav Jew. It was an heretic Jew, because he will never have founded a faction of Islam if he wasn't an heretical Jew. And the Shia Islam became the depository of many mystery schools. At one point, they created the Nizari ones, created the Ashashins, that became the Sicars, the killers of the Knights Templars against the Sunni. The Sunni were expanding. The Pope was worried. The Pope embraced the model of secret societies that they found in the Middle East. And in fact, the Knights Templars were based on the Ashashins, the whole structure and initiation and the way even they dressed. So the Ashashins were the ones that they will use to kill all the opposition within the Sunni without getting involved themselves, because of course they were Christian, they were Templars, they had to play the role of the good guys. They couldn't go around slipping throats in the middle of the night like ninjas, which is the modality of the Ashashins. So there is a lot of history that needs to be recovered, because in Gaza was also a fortress of the Knights Templars, and they had two fortresses, one in Gaza and one on the Temple Mount. And at one point, Saladin arrived. The Templars could only save the people that could come into the fortress. Christians and Jews were slaughtered 800 years ago in Gaza, just like it happens now for the Muslims that are the descendants of Saladin and his Sunnis. What comes around goes around, my friend. You need to know history before you can correctly nail it down, because we are all sinners. There is no part that can go in front of a mirror and say we are superior to the other and we have a superior ethics and moral, because at one point in history, you did the same thing. So
that's why I'm glad that you're coming on this show and that you're sharing your wisdom and knowledge of history, because that's what we actually need to do. We need to get to the bottom of this history. And I'm trying to go down the rabbit hole, but the one consistency that I see when I go down the rabbit hole is that the central bankers are controlling all these wars. Like Smedley Butler said, war is a racket. And when you see who's behind, essentially, when I look at the Talmud, and the Talmud says that even the best of non-Jews should all be killed. Show no mercy to the non-Jews.
The thing is, you talk about the bankers, but the Knights Templars brought the banking system into Europe, not the Talmud, not the Jews. And so when the Knights Templars were persecuted, they were not persecuted for ideological reasons by, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, wasn't put on the stake for ideological reason. It was about money. They were the first one to permit a banking system, and also with their checks and their protection of the pilgrims, and the way that the system with the checks, you can sign a check and then go and cash it in the next temple. They gave birth to the bankings, and they were Christians. So let's not all focus on the Talmud, when the Jews themselves were, of course, involved with banking, because they have it in their blood, and they were permitted by the religion to do something the Christians couldn't do. But then the Christians permitted, from the Knights Templars onwards, something. And that also, I would say this, nowadays in the Middle East, every time the Westerners do something, they always point out, for example, oh, the Crusaders, the Crusaders. Well, let me tell you one thing. This is a book by a general of the Italian Carabinieri, Domenico Libertini. In this book, it explains how it was the Muslims that inspired the very birth of the knighthoods in Europe, because there was no concept until the year 1000 of going around and killing in the name of a religion, which is Christianity. Jesus never said, go and kill in my name. So it was completely erroneous to do something like that. And the Pope had to change and embrace the Islamic way in order to create the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, the Knights Templars, the Teutonic Knights, and of course the Crusades that conquered Jerusalem. They had to change their own identity as Christians. But once they changed, they never looked back. And so the thing is that today, when the Muslims blame, oh, the Crusaders, maybe they should blame themselves, who inspired the Crusaders to become Crusaders. So it is, there is a lot of unfortunate misinformation regarding certain subjects. The fact that the Muslims inspired, for example, the creation of the first bases where pilgrims they were going on the way to Mecca could be protected, that was an inspiration for then the Knights Templars doing the same thing for the Christians, you see. So these things need to be specified so we understand, I think, historically.
That's why I'd love to have you back on the show, because yeah, we do need to understand history and look at it from all perspectives. Is it true that Freemasonry is Judaism for the Goy?
No, Freemasonry was born in Syria. That's another thing. Syria gave birth, and Syria and the Middle East in general gave birth to the very basis of Freemasonry. And we can actually find some aspects. The tomb of Hiram Abif. Where is the tomb of Hiram Abif? Sorry, I give you a question.
I don't know, but the rabbis have said
is in the Middle East, in Lebanon. The basis of the Jewish practice didn't lead necessarily to Freemasonry. It was the secret society, like I explained, who inspired even the Vatican to create their own knighthoods and stuff. Because then Freemasonry, a lot of Freemasonry comes from, of course, the guilds. But another side of Freemasonry is inspired by the knighthoods. And today, for example, a Freemason goes through the same rituals in the first 3 degrees, then depending on the rite they embrace, they go through a rite of perfection that brings them into the world of the knighthoods, and they study each knighthood, and they at times get invested with these knighthoods within these rites. And so it's obvious that if all of this was inspired by groups like the Ashashin or secret societies, like, for example, the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt was fascinated with 2 things: the Gnostics and the Zoroastrians. I don't think these people came from Japan or from North America. They came from the Middle East. Where is the Mesopotamic, the ancient Sumerians? Where were they based? Sorry, Victor. No, because, I mean, they were in the Middle East. So, I mean, the society, the civilization comes from there. We can't blame the Jews for something that existed before they even existed. When Freemasonry started to evolve in the modern times as a speculative Freemasonry from the moment that they structured in England, the first Grand Lodge of England, then they went back into the Middle East and they found affinities with the secret societies that were already there, that had inspired them. See, Freemasonry becomes a depository of all the mystery schools. But one of the main mystery schools, of course, the Sufis that were born first within the Shia and then expanded within the Sunni, today are considered the nice, peaceful, oh, the Sufis, all peaceful. That's complete and utter nonsense. Just go to Pakistan and see if you want a reference. But the Sufis were used by both French Freemasonry. They even, if you go to the hall of the Temple of the Grand Orient of France, you will find a great image of one of the founder of modern Algeria, who was a Freemason and a Sufi. The Sufis were used because they were a secret societies, like I said earlier, to sabotage gradually all the Ottoman Empire. And then when the Sufi thing didn't work out anymore, well, then Salafism was created. And Salafism was created by, of course, British Freemasons in accordance also with the Grand Orient Freemasons of France. And it took place, the birth of it in Egypt. And then it gave birth to the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood in turn gave birth to everything that we know within Salafi jihadists. But at the same time, then you have the sponsor of Salafi jihadists, who is another branch of Salafis, the Wahhabis, the rich ones from the Emirates, from the Saudi Arabia and all the various Emirates who are the finance. Today, you couldn't have Hamas without Qatar. You couldn't have, so up until recent times, we can say that the Knights Templar, the modern Knights Templars, who are the Freemasons, no? Some of them at least, claim to be, like, I make an example. The father of George W. Bush, George Bush father, George Bush Sr., a Freemason who saw himself as a Knights Templar. The Knights Templars, like Licio Gelli, the head of the P2, said, were very clever in putting one faction of the Muslims against the other, and they always did that. So just put one faction against the other, put one faction. Then at one point, though, in recent times, the Russians came into the equation with the Chinese, and they started to get more and more closer to the Shia Islam, which of course had their headquarters in the Republic of Iran. What happened during the reign of the Shah was happening because, as you know, in the early 50s, there was a CIA coup, but it was also because of Freemasonry that was not only permitted, but took over the country together with the Illuminati. And then in the end, of course, when the Shah escaped, and then Ayatollah Khomeini took control. Do you know where all the gold of Iran ended?
Probably in the United States or the city of London.
No, it ended up there. And it was the Italian mobsters who went to Iran in the last days of the Shah and took all the gold. There was real mobsters. This is a testimony given by one of the dons of the Sicilian Cosa Nostra in America. He went and recruited the most fierce mobsters in Sicily, went to Iran and picked up the gold, and it was delivered directly to the Vatican Bank.
By the way, the Vatican, I understand, is completely evil. So I'm not defending any religion at this point because they all seem to just be manipulating people.
That the Jesuits and the Sabbatean Frankists work in cohorts. So you have the Sabbatean Frankists, which is like the banking system, you know, that takes place. And you mentioned earlier the fact that the Jews have definitely a stronghold in the banking system is because of the Sabbateans. And then you have the Vatican with the Jesuits, who of course have also a very strong connection and is historic. In fact, I describe this strong connection in my books. In volume 4, I start describing the connection between the Sabbateans and the Jesuits. And these are things that are not commonly discussed. So the Pope, this Pope, but also other popes like Ratzinger, they had, of course, Jewish origins, and they had connections with the Sabbatean Frankists. And these things
and the Freemasons, right? They're also connected with the Freemasons, aren't they? These popes and these top leaders.
The Freemasons, okay, let's say we have a pyramid, you know? On top, we have the Sabbatean Frankists and the Jesuits. Under you have the Illuminati orders, and then you have under that the Freemasons, and of course you have the think tanks of the whole system. We can consider today Davos as the modern Illuminati. We have a German professor, just like Adam Weishaupt, who is Klaus Schwab, and this is well described in my volume 7 of my Confessions, in which I described the occult element of the Great Reset, which is not really ever discussed because we don't really know much about Klaus Schwab's background to do that. Instead, once you study Klaus Schwab, his mentor was Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was never considered a real Jew. He was excommunicated by Rabbi Marvin Altenman, excommunicated Henry Kissinger. He went to Israel. He asked a sandwich with pork, a prosciutto sandwich. So Henry Kissinger was never really a real Jew. He was a Sabbatean Frankist, and he was excommunicated as such by the Zionists, but not the Zionists as we know them, the Zionist nationalists, because there is, I repeat, two kinds of Zionists, the Zionist nationalists and the labor Zionists. The most common Sabbatean Frankist name household is the Rothschild. Everybody knows them. And everybody knows them, but nobody knows how in history, and I explain this in my books, they gradually financed what became the Frankfurt School that gave us this demented woke ideology and everything else. So I have deep hate for everything that is leftist. I had to leave my country, where I can't go back because of the persecution from leftist forces. And so for that reason, here in the United States, starting to see these idiotic students in their universities going after the Jews when they should go after somebody else if they want to really go about after power. Okay, let's understand that we can't go after.
Should they go after?
But after an ideology, and an ideology that we have in regards to leftism and communism is perverted because it came out of the Illuminati. It was a disciple of Adam Weishaupt that published the manifesto of Karl Marx for the League of the Jews, just. So,
and who's behind the Illuminati? I mean, I want to get to
yes.
I want to get to the root of the problem. So, who's behind the Illuminati? The Amish?
No. We said that they were the Gnostics in the Middle East. You have to go back to the Sumerian times, to Babylon, to go and find the origins in ancient Egypt. Like, for example, a very important lodge of the Illuminati in the Middle East was the one in Cairo that gave birth to the dynasty of the Fatimids that ruled the Middle East until the Sunni and Saladin came along. Now,
so you're talking pharaohs, the pharaohs. The pharaohs, but also the pharaohs were Gnostic,
okay.
Right?
We said the Gnostics were the Illuminati of the time. Well, the Gnostics, the main school of the Gnostic, where it comes out of Alexandria of Egypt. So that is Illuminati. Then the Illuminati in the modern times, then they spread through a series of mystery schools. Even the Rosicrucians partly are Illuminati, if you want to go into that perspective. But then when they wanted to get more political and codify the whole thing in more political terms, that's where Adam Weishaupt came into the equation. Because Adam Weishaupt was not really about esoteric elements. He was more about power and controlling structures of power. So from that moment onwards, he gave birth to secret societies that were politically interested, not really esoterically interested. And that led also to the creation of the Ukrainian identity, for example. In the 1850s, when with their progressive revolutions, they were taking over Europe, they started to also, with a number of secret societies from Poland and from Germany, to create this Ukrainian identity that will eventually lead to an opposition towards the Russians. The Ukrainian identity is completely crafted and artificially constructed. It doesn't exist.
But besides Satan, who would you say is really ruling over the world right now?
Well, like I said, the Jesuits. So you have to go to a place called Borgo Santo Spirito, which is on this side of the Vatican, going back, where there's an office where they used to say they control the world. The Black Pope, which in this time is called Sosa. Sosa is from Venezuela and is a dear friend of the Pope, which we know is South America. For those who don't know Catholicism was hijacked in the early 60s with the Second Vatican Council, which was inspired by these new Vatican popes who were Freemasons. And so in December 1965, when this Second Vatican Council terminated and changed forever the church, that led to the Pope we have today and to the progressive nonsense we hear, which has nothing of Christian. It's just about putting together all this nonsense in a one-world religion. Well, in December 1965, as I explained in Volume 7 of my Confessions, they had a secret meeting in the catacombs of Rome. And that is called the Pact of the Catacombs. And the guy in charge of that meeting became the mentor of Klaus Schwab, just to let you know how everything is connected. So, I mean,
didn't the Rothschilds take over the Vatican though when they took over the bank? So technically, the Jews
at one point
control Christianity. I mean,
at one point,
isn't it safe to say that the Jews
there is a lot
control
of
Christianity?
Okay, yeah, there's a bit of misunderstanding here. The Pope and the Vatican had, of course, an agreement with the Rothschild for a specific amount of time, but then they walked out of that agreement, and only recently, through an organization led by Linda Rothschild, they got back into a deal with them. But in reality, the Vatican works as an equal with the Sabbatean Frankists, not as under the Sabbatean Frankists. They never have been under, if not for a brief period when they had to ask money to the Rothschild. But no longer they are formally in a deal with the Rothschild. So that is
that why the Roman Catholic priests and popes in the Vatican have like satanic rituals within the actual Vatican, because they also are using redemption through sin, and so they're having satanic ritual abuse, pedophilia with children and everything. So essentially, the Sabbatinian Frankists and the Roman Catholic Church,
the Jesuits, level. I would say the Jesuits. That's why also it's erroneous to say the Catholics. I would say the Jesuits are what the Sabbatean are for the Jewish. So when we identify the Catholics, we should be specific about the Jesuits, because the Jesuits took control of the Vatican, and when the Cold War was starting to wear off in the early 80s, John Paul II had to fight the head of the Jesuits and convoke them, because, I mean, they wanted to already take control after the Second Vatican Council, but they didn't manage. Then gradually they managed, because, of course, they were all blackmailable, these popes. I mean, in particular, Ratzinger. Ratzinger participated to the Second Vatican Council. He then became the head of the modern Inquisition. And later, after John Paul II, as you know, he became pope. But he was highly blackmailable because he had a fixation for young boys. So he at one point, he was blackmailed out of the Vatican, and he had to give his unprecedented resignation, forced by Cardinal Martini, who was a Jesuit and the mentor of Pope Francis, who, when he received them for the Day of the Families in Milan, Ratzinger came out of the plane, went to hug him, and he said, now you have to resign. And that's what he did. So the Jesuits had a group, a lodge in Switzerland called the Mafia of St. Gallo, the Mafia of St. Gallen. You can go and check this on Google. And this Mafia of St. Gallen placed Bergoglio there. Jorge Maria Bergoglio is a Freemason. He's known to be a Freemason, but he's also known for having been involved with the P2 in Argentina. The P2 had control of Argentina at one point, because it was one of the few countries around the world that was very much linked with Italy. And at one point, there is a whole story I describe in my book, Pope Francis, the Last Pope, which has been a bestseller in Catholic circles. I describe how these two poor Jesuit priests got arrested because of Bergoglio, because they were being a little bit too anti-government. And so Bergoglio, he gave the information to where they were, and they were arrested, and they were sent to an island where they were kept in isolation for a few months. And these poor Jesuits basically came out of this arrest completely traumatized of this kidnapping, because they were held in very bad conditions. And one of them, actually, when Pope Bergoglio was about to get elected the first time, because Bergoglio was actually proposed immediately after John Paul II. But then there was a Argentinian journalist who brought out this story, and Bergoglio had to back off. But then they started to, a campaign in order to rebuild the image of Bergoglio until after the death, until they forced Ratzinger out, because Ratzinger didn't die until many years later, as you know. So that was the sad thing about it. It was like the Jesuits did a coup d'etat in the Vatican. The Jesuits had never been popes. The Jesuits had a specific rule to never become popes, and I tell you why. The Jesuits were founded by Ignazio Loyola. We said he was probably himself he was involved with the Alumbrados. He actually was arrested 5 times by the Inquisition. 5 times by the Inquisition. He was known because he also hypnotized young girls, and he did all kinds of weird sexual magical rituals with them. But then at one point, when the Inquisition was really after him, he left Spain and he went to France, where eventually in 1530 he will create, with a group of friends, the Jesuits. He went back then, he went to Rome in 1540, and that's when he convinced the Pope that the Jesuits would be useful, because the Vatican didn't have anymore a military intelligence order like the Knights Templar. They had eliminated the Knights Templar. And there was, of course, the Reformation. They had to bring on the Counter-Reformation. They needed some people that were skilled also with the black arts and with the military tactics. And these were all military. And so he said, okay, I would support the foundation of the Jesuits. And at that point, the Jesuits very cleverly, the first thing they did was not only to infiltrate the various Lutherans, Calvinists, Protestants that were starting to expand around Europe. They wanted knowledge. So they went to Tibet, became lamas. They went to the Emperor of China, where they became after advisors to the Emperor of China. They went to India and became the Brahmins, and they were, they didn't bring Christianity to these places. No, no, no. Their technique was different. They actually became what they were actually, they embraced the Lamaism, they embraced all these Eastern cultures so they could bring them back to the Vatican. Imagine that at one point, they were so powerful in China that they were convincing 6 popes, one after the other, to embrace Confucianism mixed with Christianity. And they were trying to convince the Vatican to embrace Confucianism. At the end, the 6th Pope, after 6 popes, they said, just to the Jesuits, give it up. We will never embrace Confucianism. But this was if you go in China, the Jesuits are revered like no other foreign entity. They have shrines to the Jesuits in Beijing. And this doesn't happen for anybody else.
The Knights Templar, is that the one that has the logo with the 2 men on the horse?
Yes, yes. The poor brothers of Christ. Huh?
That's totally gay. A lot of these things are gay. Knights Templar were gay. It turns out that the Vatican is totally gay. Why is all this stuff so gay? What's with all this religion that the gay? What is that?
I think that there were a lot of accusations, especially when they were eliminated, because let's not forget, Friday the 13th is actually an infamous date because of the Templars. They were on that horse, 2 soldiers on a horse, 2 men, because they represent poverty. Because they didn't afford 2 horses, they had 1 horse. Of course, this is one version of the event. Then, though the enemies that wanted to destroy the Templars, especially because of economic reasons, they accused them of all kinds of things. And in reality, there was part of the Templars that had embraced secretly the Baphomet, which was Mohammed on a cross. Now, this Baphomet is very rare I put it here on the cover, this cross. I'm going to see if I can find it for you. It's a cross that was found in a Templar church in between Turkey and Syria in the 1950s. Wow. It's never been showed because that is Mohammed on a cross. Watch with the beard.
Wow.
Okay. Now, they kept it, and still to this day, the Turks don't show it because they would be afraid to show it to the Muslims because they will blow up the whole place. Because, of course, Muhammad, you can't even represent Muhammad with the drawing, let alone putting him on a cross and worship him. But the Nizari, the Shia Muslims who were involved with the Templars, they were worshipping in secret Muhammad on a cross. So and that's why Baphomet comes from Mohammed. Then the modern Baphomet, of course, that we all know is this one, the Baphomet that is paraded around the Capitol Hills, which is based on the image drawn by Eliphas Levi. But the original Baphomet is actually Mohammed, and the symbolism of the cross is a symbol, of course. Mohammed never went on the cross, but the cross, as you know, since ancient Egypt, the ankh and everything, it has a specific esoteric meaning, the 4 elements, and Mohammed on top of it. So
did you make it to the 33 degree Mason? Were you ever asked to become a 33 degree Mason?
Yes, I was a member of the Supreme Council of Romania. I'm a member, formally a member of, because I don't practice anymore Freemasonry, so I don't really. I was basically involved with Freemasonry for many years, and in fact, in my books, I described all the rites. I was involved with emulation. I was involved with the Swedish rite. I was involved with the Memphis and Mizraim. I became 90 and 95. I became a 33rd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite. So I have all the degrees, and in the degrees you have a lot of knowledge. However, because Freemasonry has made many compromises, which I don't like, especially when I came here to America, I saw that the Grand Lodge of California, for example, was held by people who were totally progressive, anti-Christian, anti-Trump. And I said, what is this? I mean, you have to understand that in reality, the Freemason, when it was founded, it was a Christian organization. It was only in 1813, after the Grand Lodge of, the Duke of Sussex reunited the ancient and the moderns, which was these 2 factions that were fighting themselves over the different prospects of Freemasonry, that Freemasonry became open to non-Christians, because of course they were building the British Empire, and the British Empire was made of Muslims, it was made of Sikh, it was made of all kinds of religions. So they made it into a way to put together all these religions. But in reality, initially, Christianity was the basic and only religion, because they were trying to bring Christians back together. You see, America was founded by Puritans who escaped Great Britain, escaped England. England had a war between Christian factions, and it became really a bad war. They were killing each other, and people escaped, and that's why we created the United States of America here. So,
is it true that when you get to be 33 degree Mason, they tell you the secret to Freemasonry is that it's actually worshiping Satan?
No. There was at one point.
Have you heard of that? Have you heard that though? Because I've heard that when you get to the 31st degree.
I explain you a little bit about this. Freemasonry was codified and formalized in the rites that we know today between the 17th and the beginning of the 18th century. At one point, a rite of Chernaou arise within ancient and accepted Scottish rite. The rite of Chernaou was built by people who were even more Gnostic, even more satanic and Luciferian in their mindset. However, one thing about ancient accepted Scottish rite that many people don't know is that it was actually born also out of present-day Haiti, voodoo. And that is really where we should actually focus if we want to study the history of things. But when you become a 33rd degree, basically the knowledge doesn't differ very much between the 30th and 33, because that's when you become a Knights Templar. And in the 30th degree, which is not really practiced by all the Freemasons, because certain constitutions, certain branches of the Scottish Rite don't practice it in the same way or don't practice it at all, because it's controversial, because it was about presenting the Knights Templars as rebels to the Vatican and to the Pope who condemned them. You see, the Knights Templars were persecuted by the Pope and the French king. And because of their not so happy ending, their myth has grown over the ages and has taken different twists and turns. The legacy, of course, of the Knights Templar was that some of them left for Scotland. And in Scotland, some of my ancestors also they gave birth with Robert the Bruce to a specific order. And it happened that from that moment onwards, then there was the Mother Lodge, Kilwinning Mother Lodge in Scotland. It happened that Scotland, that's why you have the Sinclair family. There is two families which are really involved with the Knights Templars and Freemason in Scotland of a certain importance. One is my family, the Lyon family, the clan, the Castle of Glamis, where the Queen Mother came from. And the other family is the Sinclair family, which I made an interview, which probably you can still find, with the late Jan Sinclair, who was the archivist of the Sinclair family, and you can find it on Google, on YouTube. And Sinclair, of course, is the family that also has that incredible church, that Roslin Chapel, the Roslin Church, is very beautiful, but it's also very symbolic. So what happened was that some Templars escaped the persecution and went to Great Britain. And in Great Britain, of course, they laid the foundations, I guess, for the future rebellion that will eventually lead to telling to the Pope to go and screw himself, because that's what they did. And that's how they founded the Anglican Church, and they retained their independence. However, today we don't have that separation anymore, because King Charles and the Pope are in bed with the same project. There is no division anymore. The Jesuits used to be fought by since the time of Queen Elizabeth I, John Dee, who, as you know, was the first 007. I talk about him also in my books. John Dee was the first 007, signed himself 007. Elizabeth I had to fight the Vatican, and they had to fight the Jesuits and the possible invasion by the Spaniards. So this goes back a long way. But all these conflicts within Christianity don't exist anymore. So now it's about putting together instead all the world religion. That's why the Pope, from early 2019, like I explain in volume 6.66 of my Confession, which is this book here, he went to, this book is important because this book, together with volume 7 and 9, they constitute what I have described as the trilogy of Cyber Satan. A trilogy of Cyber Satan is
Cyber Satan.
Yes,
that's artificial intelligence.
Yes, that's artificial intelligence. And in volume 9, I conclude the last chapter with the Quantum Prince of Darkness, the upcoming quantum computer that will retransform the world in a medieval setup. Feudalism is on the rise once you have a computer which is not on the reach of everybody, because nobody can have a quantum computer at the moment if you're not a billionaire. So a quantum computer can break into cryptocurrencies, can destroy every possibility of you protecting yourself with a password, because there's no passwords that can be. So the rise of the Cyber Satan will go in sync with the rise of the Antichrist in 2030. That is the turning point of this great reset.
Wow, I'm going to quote your wife Christine on this when she says, "Oh my God, what do we do?"
We have to be aware that at one point we might have to go off the grid, and we might not be able to live within the system as we know it, because the system will be compromised. And so if we want to live in those cities that where they live, you will have to be, of course, you have to embrace their rules. You will have to embrace their values. And if you are against them, then there is no other way than just to reject everything and go off the grid. So there is a moment in which we will not be able to go along with all this. And then that is the moment we will have to go somewhere else.
Will you be able to do that with Christine? Because the thing is, the both of you seem pretty like you have a nice suit on, and she dresses nicely.
That is the way we like to present ourselves, because we like to have a sense of, we are always very much about people need to have a discipline, and we like to have a discipline. But you see, we live in very moderate ways, and we live really on the verge of the desert, of the high, here we are in the low desert and the high desert. You have this desert, which is an immense space, and in 10 minutes, I'm out of here. I don't have any traffic. I'm just in the desert. That is a big space, and you can be away from, for example, I calculated exactly when, they detonate a nuclear bomb in Los Angeles, we are out of that, but we have to be out of that, and then we have to go even further. But to go even further, you have to have roads which are free. If you are on a main highway, or you are in the center of a city during a nuclear detonation, you are screwed. So you have to have emergency planning. You have to have solar generators. You have to have everything. You have to have food like I have for many months in various forms. You have to be prepared. You cannot be simply thinking that you can enjoy all this forever. If there is an emergency, yes, we can be off the grid.
But wouldn't you, as a 33-degree Freemason and as a knight, be able to go into one of the bunkers?
There is no 33-degree Freemason if you have a nuclear war.
But wouldn't you be able to go into a bunker and say, "Hey, listen, I'm with the."
Of course, you might have access to a bunker, but will you actually be able to exceed the bunker before the whole place, the whole shit hits the fan? I don't know. I mean, it's really a matter of very short time notice when these kind of things might happen. So you have to have an emergency plan, first of all, for you and your dear ones in the immediate. You can't expect, okay, can I have a place in the bunker? By the time you say that, you're already screwed. You understand? So the important thing is to have knowledge of weapons. I'm a former military. You have to have knowledge of weapons. You have to have knowledge of your surroundings. You have to know the roads. You have to know how to move. I mean, simple things like that. And survival techniques. I think that actually a lot of those survival shows that we see today, they're almost like programming the people in the future to be able to survive when they will be left with very little.
Now, you've written prolifically many books about confessions of a Illuminati. What was the weirdest thing in your mind that you had to do as a Freemason to go to the next level?
Freemasonry is not Freemasonry. I will not say that. Yeah, there is some weird, awkward moment, particular moments within initiations, passage of degrees, but it's not. I mean, aside from irregular Freemasonry, which is much more exciting than regular Freemasonry when it comes to the initiation of what you will view. In fact, I remember once I remember the deputy Grand Master of the Russian Grand Lodge in Moscow said, "Leo, you definitely have more fun in irregular lodges, but we have to, I'm a regular Mason, but you definitely had a lot more fun than me." And I was like, yes, I might have a lot more fun than you, of course, because I never respected the rules of just going through the regular networks. However, there is paramasonic and secret societies, which I, of course, described in my work as the network of the Illuminati, which are the initiations and what you encounter there is much more than Freemasonry. I mean, Freemasonry is not really a secret society. There's nothing secret about it. Everybody knows about it. Just go on the internet. Secret societies who are real secret societies, they don't have a page on the internet. They come and recruit you, and their initiations can be really, the most incredible initiation was walking on top of a cobra in the middle of the night in Egypt, outside in an oasis that belonged once to Napoleon. That was a pretty scary thing to do, because I had to do it almost barefoot, and the cobra was in front of me, and I had to recite a prayer before walking over it.
Wow. What did you do to get over that? I mean, you must have been terrified.
No, you have to have your mind clear. It's like a question. It's like being, you have to completely clear your mind, and you have to pray, and you have to put your life in the hands of God.
Who do you pray to?
God.
What God?
No, there is only one God. If it's an initiation that it's required, I mean, of course, if you are in the OTO, like that's another kind of initiation. You have all kinds of entities. There is initiations in which I went through, in which they were blowing you demons with the with the air, ancient Egyptian deities, and then I had to go and exercise myself because. But like I said, I pray only to one God, and that is the God that we know commonly through the Abrahamic religions. But I would say that it's also, aside from the organized structure of the religions around it, the one God is always been of great help for me and for my family. And me and my wife are very strong believers in God, and we always believe that He has helped us, and He has really helped us, man, because there were moments in which we had some really powerful enemies after us, and we didn't know if we would survive it, and we are still here. So that is just having faith. You have to have faith.
Wow, one of the commandments is thou shalt not have any God before me. But when you were being puffed with those demons coming at you,
that was very early in my life. You see, when I was still within the Illuminati network, I joined. In my books, I explain all this. It's been a long story. I was initiated in 1993 in the Illuminati and in Freemasonry. So by the year 2003, I started to realize certain things wasn't really right. Once I received certain initiation where they were talking also about sacrifice of fetuses, sacrifice of babies, and all kind of that really led me to renounce to all this, and then I walked out of it. But it took me 3 years between 2003 and 2006 to wage an internal war within the Illuminati, and then eventually in 2006 I published my blog. I came out of it, but I also then later on in 2008 was accused of espionage. And I had to renounce to my only son, which I haven't seen since 2008 because of the choice I made. My son is being brought up by a member of the World Economic Forum. I talk about him in volume 10 of my Confessions. And I don't have any contact with him, and I'm not allowed to have any contact with him. And this is a member, a Turkish, very rich guy, who is now the new husband of my former wife, who was a descendant of Prophet Muhammad. And it was a marriage that was built up within the Illuminati. But I discuss it in this book, volume 10. So if you want to know more about it, you can go and check it.
Wow. You have a tremendous sense of humor. That's the one thing that I feel is most refreshing about you. I did not know that about you, because normally when I see you, you're quite serious. Every time they interview you on these shows, they pick your brains for all these things. But I've been very pleasantly surprised with the sense of humor that you have.
You have to have
also,
a sense of humor. Me and my wife always say that. You always have to say that, because when you see certain things, you're like, oh, whatever. I mean, their own problem. I mean, we saw things that are out of this world, and in the end, you have to keep on having faith, because I mean, there is certain things that are really out of this world. I mean, there was a moment in which my wife was almost being abducted by aliens for real, and it was like, I think, an experience that scared her very much. But I mean, she discussed after these kind of things in her books, and she kind of she let it all out, and I think it was it's always good to write about these things. Now I will have to go, because as I told you, I'm a little bit with my time. But thank you so much for having me on the show, and I hope in the future we can continue to discuss many other subjects of interest.
I would love to, and please bring Christine on, because she is fantastic.
She's
and
a
the two
little
of you,
bit, she doesn't really like the public eye, I tell you the truth. I hardly convinced her to go on my show.
She's like, great. She's wonderful. Where can people find your stuff? If you can quickly just
oh yes, leozagami.com is my website. You have all the links also to my book, but also you have, of course, Amazon. You can put Leo Zagami or Christy Zagami or the Zagami family cookbook if you want some of the recipes, including my own recipe, the Illuminati pasta, which is also a recipe which I put together for this book, which I think a lot of people will find interesting. I don't tell you the truth about the Illuminati pasta, because I can't really publicly say the truth about it. It's a secret. It's a secret. You just have to eat it, and then after the secret will be revealed to you. Thank you so much, Victor. So much.
Happy New Year, Merry Christmas,
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from me and my wife. And we hope maybe if I convince her one day we can have a show together, it would be fantastic. But I can't assure you anything, because with the women I can't ever assure you anything. Also the same regarding Roseanne Barr.
Maybe one day I would.
They say that women
taste...
are very volatile creatures, so I don't guarantee for them. Thank you very much. God bless you all. God bless your audience at Revolution Radio. Ciao, Victor.
Ciao, ciao. So you've been listening to Leo Zagami. You can find all his information in the description section of this podcast, which you can find at the VictorHugoCollection.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page, and you'll find the links for the page on Rumble and BitChute. And yeah, you can find his books and all that information there. That was a fascinating time that Leo Zagami was able to share with us. And he actually shared more time than he was originally allotted. We were only supposed to do 90 minutes. So I'm very grateful that he was able to share more time with us. For those of you who are wondering why I didn't ask him more questions, realize sometimes it's better to just stay quiet and listen and learn. And this won't be the last time that I'll have him on. God willing, he'll come on again, and you'll be able to email me any questions that you would have asked. Send me any emails to vhviipress@msn.com. That's V as in Victor, H as in Hugo, V as in Victor, I as in information, press@msn.com. I was really surprised at his take on Zionism, and I did notice that he did say that he's an Ashkenazi. So I wanted to ask him what that was like to be both a Christian and Ashkenazi. But as you can see, we ran out of time. I also wanted to ask him more about the Freemasons and the initiation ceremonies. I've been told by other Freemasons that, for example, you have to urinate on a Bible and urinate on a cross. I've also been told by some Freemasons that if you decide to leave the Freemasons, you never really leave. If they need you to do something, they will contact you and you better do it. And also, if you give up some of the secrets of Freemasonry, that they will kill you. So there's a lot of things that the Freemasons, the lower levels, don't understand. They see themselves as being charitable and some sort of philanthropic organization. But these secret societies, in my opinion, anything that hides in the darkness, I don't trust. I really think that we would be living in a much better society if it was an open society. So I am really impressed with the way that Leo Zagami has the integrity and the conviction of character to be able to share some of these secrets. I'm sure there are certain things that he is not sharing, but as you can see, he's even forfeited the ability to see his own son. So I give that a lot of credibility. I will try to contact Roseanne Barr, and I have other people who can possibly connect me with Roseanne Barr. I'd like to get in contact with her because I'm being painted as some sort of anti-Semite, and that's not the case at all. I have nothing but curiosity, and I want to find out why it is that allegedly these people who identify as Jews want to kill all non-Jews. And I happen to fall into that that category. So as a self-preservationist, and then when people say, well, it's not all the Jews, as Leo Zagami was saying, I didn't want to get into it with them because, like I said, I just wanted to hear more of what he had to say. I've said this before, I'll say it again. If you're a Jew and you know what the Talmud says, that even the best of non-Jews should all be killed, and you're not out there protesting it, or you're not out there at least trying to express to the other Jews, hey, listen, you know, maybe we should not want to kill all non-Jews, then I feel that you're responsible as well. You know, there's accountability for that. I was also surprised with Leo's interpretation of what's going on in Palestine. I understand he says that you've got to study that history and stuff, but I just can't see how killing innocent women and children has anything to do with that. That just seems like vengeance to me. And I was surprised that he was making excuses for that. At least that's what it seemed like to me. And also, I didn't want to get into it with him about Trump, who I don't trust. but he is very glad to be in the United States. He went through some persecution in Italy. So just like me, I am here living as a veteran American refugee in the former Soviet Union Republic of Georgia, near the border with Russia, Turkey, and Armenia, and Azerbaijan. This is an Orthodox Christian country. They're going through some sort of a color revolution right now that's being instigated by U.S. taxpayers, but I'm not going to stick my nose in where it doesn't belong. So I am just reporting what I'm seeing and hearing on the ground here, but I'm not going to be part of any kind of protest that I have nothing to do with. So I can see his perspective of just being glad to be in the United States and his supporting the president of the United States incoming, which is President Trump. I hope that I'm wrong, and I have no problem making a public apology if I'm wrong about Trump or about the Jews. But the information that I'm getting right now is that, yes, follow the money, it's the Jews, and Trump may not be the Messiah. Anyway, you've been listening to the Maverick artist Victor Hugo on the Modern Art Gonzo Journalism Show on Revolution Radio. Listener supported. Please support Revolution Radio and go to VictorHugoCollection.com and check out these podcasts on Rumble and BitChute. Thank you very much. We'll see you next Tuesday and Thursday. We've got some really cool guests coming up, so stay tuned.